Genesis 1 verses 20 through 31. Two of the days of creation. Two of God's version of the story. 2 days in that version of His story. I love the original CSI series. The one that started in Las Vegas, the one that started with Grissom and Catherine Willows and that group of crime scene investigators. And one of the reasons I love it is because as it ran for 15 seasons, it featured one of the great characters of the 2000s. Grissom was an entomologist who led that team for most of its run in that original series. And just a fascinating character. When I looked at the chart that I have of all the subjects we're going to study this year in this direction, and I read the article that we ran and mailed out this week, I immediately thought of Grissom. I thought of his mantra, don't get ahead of the evidence. Don't jump to theories, don't jump to conclusions that the evidence has not led you to. And then B, I thought about the fact that in one episode he uses a pig to study decomposition. And he talks about it being closely related to humanity. We're going to start with that one. And then the thrust of the lesson will go back to A. Evolutionists constantly want to claim, and they draw their tree or they draw that series of figures walking in a line, that we are descended from primates. That we're descended from apes, or we're descended from gorillas, and now they've decided that the chimp is the closest relative that we have. Let me ask you some questions based on that projection that they give us. Why do we experiment on pigs more than we do primates, if we're that close to primates? Did you know that we experiment on pigs second only to rats in this world? Because so much of the pig relates to us. Why do we use pigs to study decomposition? Why do we use pigs to study toxicology? Why do we use pigs to study depression in humans if we're closer to a chimp? Why do we use pigs for skin grafts and transplants? My point, it's not that we're descended from either. As we've seen repeatedly this year, and I'll look at again in just a second, it's an absolutely absurd idea. One species does not produce something else. But what I want to know is, why are evolutionists so biased? Why does our tree have to stand upright and have opposable thumbs when we're so close to a pig? Why are we looking for a link between man and monkeys, or man and chimps, or man and orangutans, but not pigs? Are we afraid of a half pig man? I mean, we're looking for this missing link, and we want something that looks half human and half monkey. Are we afraid of one that looks half man, half pig? Does that cause nightmares? By the way, we also have a whole lot of DNA in common with rats. Where's the half rat man? I got a good one for you. Beyond the fact that we are related to everything in the mammalian world, because there's only so much DNA to choose from, There are only so many bases that make up DNA. We have no choice but for there to be connections. Did you know we share 99% of our DNA with a head of lettuce? Did we descend from lettuce? We have more in common with a head of lettuce than we do with a chimpanzee or a pig or a rat. Where's that missing link? Are we just salads walking around? Logically, we know the answer is no. So our world asks us to suspend the logic, to ignore the evidence and just believe whatever they tell us to believe. You also share DNA with your siblings, but you're not descended from them. So let's go back to Gill's mantra. Do not get ahead of the evidence. Let the evidence come in and let the evidence lead you to the right conclusion. Base your theory on what the evidence says, and then your conclusion will be accurate. He also uses the idea of don't ignore the evidence. You know, evidence comes in, you don't like where it's going, you throw it out. It's what our world does all around us. He says that won't work. The evidence comes in and you go where it takes you, even if you do not like the conclusion. So what are some of the problems with evolution based on the evidence? And we've looked at a lot of that evidence already. Well, the problems start with the tendency of those who spout this rhetoric to get ahead of or ignore completely the evidence. Things like, what do we look at? Laws of thermodynamics. From nothing comes nothing. So our world did not, without the influence of an outside source, God, pop into existence. There either has to be something there and matter's eternal to produce what's here in this world today, or there was nothing and an outside force, God, acted on it. They ignore evidence such as there has never been in the history of science evidence of one species becoming another species. There's no missing link. We've yet to dig up this half one thing, half another thing that tells us we came from this tree, or we evolved from this creature, or we evolved from this head of lettuce. You have dogs, you have cats, you have man, you have primates, you have pigs. We're all separate. We're all distinct. Number two, they ignore the fact that no new species are popping up. Now, we can crossbreed, create new breeds of dogs, of cats, but we're not producing new species. Our cat had a baby recently. Guess what she had? Yeah, she had a butterplant. No, she had a kitten. And the next time she gets pregnant, she'll have a kitten, Ed. She's not going to give birth to a cow. She's not going to give birth to some new animal that we've never seen before. It'll always be a kitten. And here's the thing, evolutionists claim that it took billions of years to get man. All right, now we're here. If their calendar's accurate, we still have the same billion of years behind us. Where's the next species? Where's the next thing? What are we evolving into? Are we not still human? Now, we may change a little bit over the centuries. We may get a little taller, may live a little longer, our ears may get a little bigger. All kinds of little micro changes take place, but we still give birth to humans. And nothing new is popping up. So did evolution just stop? Evolution is survival of the fittest. So we're the pinnacle of it. Do you know you can put a cockroach in a microwave and turn it on for 3 days and the microwave will walk out when you turn it off? The cockroach will walk out of the microwave when you turn it off? Try that on you. Are we the pinnacle of, quote, evolution? Or is the cockroach? Number 3, they want billions of years, even though we've already looked at the fact that billions of years are not helping them. Remember the law of entropy? Things fall apart. They don't come together. The longer they have, the worse it gets for their theory. But they want them. They claim they need those billions of years to evolve. Can they find them? Another problem with evolution. Can they find those billions of years? Hardly. We have a very young earth. You start digging in the ground and our earth is very young. Beyond the biblical timeline, the evidence has come in our lifetimes, adults. Remember when Mount St. Helens erupted and devastated everything around it? And we were told it was going to take decades and centuries and millennia for that ecosystem to rebuild. And within just a few years, the lichen had begun to grow and the elk had moved in to eat the lichen and break down the rocks, and then the trees sprouted. And within a decade and a half, 2 decades, Mount St. Helens region had completely rebuilt itself. We don't need billions of years. And they can't find it. Another problem with evolution is the fossil record. First of all, we've already mentioned it, there's no halves. We're not digging up things that we cannot identify because they're half one thing and half another. Number 2, the fossil record, we end up with dinosaurs in the same earth levels as man. And yet we're supposedly billions of years apart in our evolutionary process. How did we get buried at the same time? How did our footprints end up on top of each other? How did we draw pictures of them? If they died out and then it took us to the 1800s to dig them up and know what they look like. And yet they're all over caves. They're on the walls of old monasteries. Fossil record, how does man end up in the older levels of the earth? Not only the same levels, we end up underneath them, buried before the dinosaurs, if they died off before we got here. What about the fact that the levels are all out of order? In their mind, you got to lay these things down as they take place. And yet we know through the evidence that in Genesis 5, 6, 7, 8, God tore all that up and flipped it upside down. He confused that whole fossil record for us. Here's the point, and it has to go back to what I said Grissom has as a mantra. Don't get ahead of the evidence. Evolution has a theory. Evolution does not want God in the process. So the theory starts by eliminating Him, and then you have to come up with some other answer. And so they run ahead of the evidence. They ignore evidence. They try to mold it to fit the theory. And that's not the way it works. It has to be in reverse of that, for the theory to be supportable. If the evidence doesn't fit, they throw it out. They ignore it. What did we look at a month or so ago? They actually changed the rules. Okay, these are scientific rules. They cannot be broken. They are laws. Laws of thermodynamics, etc., laws of entropy. They cannot be changed until they don't fit what we want them to fit, and so we'll write new laws, and we'll suspend those. Whichever choice they use, whether they run ahead of the evidence or they ignore it, what happens? Sooner or later, the real evidence comes in. And when it does, it proves them wrong. We prove a young earth. We prove that Big Bangs destroy and not create. We prove that we're expanding and moving away, not coming together. We prove that as time passes, things break down. So we look for another answer. We look at the evidence around us and we ask, what does the evidence say? Where does the evidence lead us? Well, it leads us to an outside source that acted on nothing to bring something into existence. And that's exactly what we get in Genesis 1. In the beginning of everything in existence, God was already there. And God created. God spoke into nothingness and brought it into existence through the power of the spoken word, through His Son. And then we get to the evidence of the things like what we're talking about. Animals, man. So we get to verse 20. And God said, let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures. Let birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heavens. God created great sea monsters, every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed it. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the waters and the seas. Let the birds multiply on the earth. And there's the fifth day, so that takes place in a day's time. Then God said, let earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth after their kind. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth after their kind. Do you see how many times that phrase is coming up? After their kind? That whatever that one particular thing is, the next one in its line is going to be its kind too. It's not going to be something totally different. And it was so. God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, the cattle after their kind, everything that creeps on the ground after its kind. And God saw that it was good. And then He said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky, over the cattle, over the earth, over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God creates man in His image. Verse 27, then verse 28, be fruitful and multiply. Rule over the earth. I've given you everything in the plants to eat. It was evening and morning. Verse 31, the sixth day. And when God gets through, it is all very good. So God's account now, separate from our world's account. Kind after kind. When humans reproduce, they produce humans. When cattle reproduce, they produce cattle. When sea creatures reproduce, they reproduce sea creatures. All in 2 days. Why all in 2 days? Because God has creatures in our world that can exist only in a symbiotic relationship. They live off of each other. They both have to come into existence at the exact same time so they can support each other. If they evolve billions of years apart, they never make it, because one cannot live without the other. Do we get new breeds? Sure. Do we have micro-mutations in our world? Absolutely. Do we get new species? No. We may find one, but then we figure out we've been missing it the whole time. It wasn't because it just popped out of the earth in 2024. Are we finding a missing link, a half and half? No. Did you know, young people especially, listen to me for a second. Did you know that evolutionists are so desperate to find the missing link that they actually make them up? They find a bone about this big around, and they decide that it's the missing link. It's a half ape, half human being, and they put it in the computer and they draw out a pretty picture and they tell us that's our ancestor, and then they do a DNA test on it and it's a pig bone. Or they find one that's a little misshapen, a skull, and they tell us that's the half and half and it's this many millions of years old. And they actually date it and realize that it's 10 years old and it was born with a birth defect. They lie about the evidence. They make up the evidence because the science does not fit. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form. It was void. And then He went on in a span of 6 days to create everything needed for life. And then He created us in His image to rule over this earth. The pinnacle of creation. The only part of creation made in His image. The only part of creation that has that divine spark that lives forever, that one day will return to Him. You see, if evolution is true, there's no hope. It means sooner or later something's going to replace us at the top of the food chain. And we will either cease to exist or we'll become subservient. If evolution is true, there's no hope because there's nothing beyond this world. This is as good as it gets. With the pain and the agony and the heartbreak and everything else that comes with this life. If this is as good as it gets, count me out. There's got to be something better on the other side. Do I like this life? Absolutely. Do I enjoy my friends and my family? And do I have a good life? Without a doubt. But if this is as good as it gets, it's pretty sad. You see, God has the answers. And it's a perfect life. And it's an eternal life. And it's based, as David said, on a gift that He gave us. It was not taken from Him. God looked around heaven and needed a solution to our sin. And the Son said, I'll do it. We talk about it sometimes from the perspective as a parent. Could you give your child for someone else? And we think absolutely not. Think about it as from the perspective of the child. Your Father in heaven looks at you and said, I need you to go die for them. Father, I got something to do that day. I'm going to go count angels. I'm going to go work on the West Wing. Jesus said, all right, I'll go. And I will lay down my life. I will set aside my glory. I will reign in my power. I will stand before rulers who have no power over me and tell them they have no power over me. And I will submit to them anyway. That's hope. Evolution has no hope. Christianity does. Which one do you prefer? Only one of them makes sense anyway. And only one of them provides hope. If you're not banking on the hope of Jesus, please change that this morning. The plan of salvation through that blood given at Calvary is that it will wash away our sins through belief that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Through repentance, through a desire to leave our past life of sin and become something new. Through confession that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and submission to baptism where we are buried in water representing His death and His burial. And we're resurrected new creatures washed of our sin. And then we have hope. Young people, please do not throw out the evidence. Do not run ahead of it. Our world is intentionally misleading you. Don't listen. Examine everything and hold on to what is good so that you have hope as we stand and sing.